Hey there, folks. This is Misadventure, here for the 7th developer diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. Now, in the previous dev diary, I said that I thought it would be on the shorter side. It ended up being my longest dev diary so far. This dev diary, I'll tell you right now, is probably going to be on the longer side because I have an enormous amount of new things to show you all, and even some stuff that I haven't worked on yet that I have started to conceptualize and I can talk about it at this stage. Now, let's just go ahead and hop in here and just get to talking about stuff, because there's so much to go over. If you've been on the Hegemony Discord, following along over there, you will have seen previews of many of these new things, but I also have some stuff that I've not shown off yet on the Discord either. So, first of all, just to note something that I won't be talking about in this video, even though I have worked on it now, are some changes I've made to the custom nation flags. I've redesigned many of the flags that I had previously designed with new graphical assets. And the reason I'm not going to talk about them yet, even though I've done the work already, is because I'm waiting for approval from the Terra Indomita developer team to make use of some of their assets in my mod. Now, I have a line of communication with the Terra Indomita developer team, and they've already granted permission for me to make use of the slinger icon from Terra Indomita so that Hegemony can have a slinger unit that has a really high quality icon that they've already made. So I have to thank them for that. I've asked them as well after that to make use of some DDS files or sort of graphical component files from the custom flag section of the files for their mod, as Terra Indomita has a lot of really high quality custom flags, and I wanted to make use of some of the components to make my own custom flags with higher quality assets. And I'm waiting for a response on that request. I think they're probably going to grant it, but I don't want to show off material that may end up not being approved of by the Terra Indomita team in terms of using their assets. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's a good practice for all mod creators to have permission from each other to use their code or their graphical assets. This mod is very much going to be in its best form if I'm able to make use of the high quality work of other modders. But if they don't want to, you know, share their work with me, that's completely fine. It's their work to not share with me. And I'm not going to include material in my mod that is from another modder if they don't give me consent to do that. So it's important to me that that is a rule that I follow consistently. And so until I get permission to use the flag component material from Terra Indomita, I'm not going to really focus on showing it in this video. You may spot it in the background as I did a lot of mock-up work with a couple different countries to redesign their flags. I'm just not going to really talk about it until I get clear permission from them to use those components. So I just wanted to sort of note that. Moving on to something you may have noticed in the background as I've been talking here is the Patasa tag, which I've added over here. I actually spent a lot of time considering how to localize Persia into this mod. So in terms of how I want to localize their name, I should say, as well as how to implement them into the mod. So in terms of the localization, we do know the Persian name for themselves from this period. I can't even begin to try to pronounce it, but it is not something that looks like the word Persia. It's a completely different word with a Z at the start, or with an X at the start, rather. And so I thought about, you know, do I include their name that they used for themselves, or do I use a name that we think the ancient Greeks used for them? And given the strong kind of Greek focus of this mod in terms of the framing, I think the better approach is to have the classical Greek name for Persia be what I call Persia in the mod. And I actually couldn't find a direct answer online about what the classical Greeks called Persia. For some reason, this specific information is very obscure, but the best I could find is that they probably called it Parasa. There's also some other terms that are associated with Persia. I think Mendes is another one, or Mides, or something kind of like that. But in terms of a name used for the nation of Persia, or the empire of Persia, I think Parasa, which is a Greek word, is the closest I can find. I will change this later if I get better information. But either way, Parasa also looks a bit like the word Persia, so it's easy for you to remember who you're dealing with here. But Parasa is now on the map in a big way. This is going to be roughly the shape of their presence on the map. Of course, over here is going to be the cutoff, and everything past this point and south of it as well. Obviously, Crete will be on the map, but everything like over here will all be off map and covered by the fog. Possibly, I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but the general borderline between the southeastern edges of the map will be around this river here, as Rhodos was in the war, and then obviously Parsa was in all of Asia Minor. But their borders over here on their western side with the coastline will be shaped later as I work on the Ionian states in the future. But for now, Parsa is just kind of here as a placeholder. Now, I should note, by the way, that by coincidence, the tag I decided to use for the Parsa tag is you can see it in the purple debug text there. It's the ASS flag, like the country that I'm using for Parsa. Their shortened acronym in the code is ASS. This wasn't like on purpose. I'm not trying to make some sort of statement about Persia here. I actually initially was using the WAR flag, the war flag, because their capital is at Sardis, which I think is going to be the capital of the Persia tag on this map once it's finished. So I was using the WAR flag, and I thought that was an appropriately ominous tag name. Not that the tag name shows up in the actual finished mod. This is just debug stuff, so a little inside joke for myself. But for some reason, I couldn't get the war localization file to work correctly, so I had to switch over to their neighboring, I don't remember the name of the nation, but its acronym is ASS. So in this mod, in the code, Persia is called ASS, which I think is kind of funny. But it's not going to be relevant for the actual mod. This is just sort of internal code humor going on here. But whatever the case. Once I design the Ionian borders, Parsa will be lined up with them, obviously, over there. And, of course, without more of Asia Minor from this map to work with, Parsa only has a limited representation. It's already much, much bigger than any other nation on the map by default. And the Parsa AI will probably get a extreme, passive income to represent the funding from the rest of the empire not on the map, as this is basically a frontier borderland area of Parsa, with only a couple of client states. Technically, what this should probably be is a couple different Persian client states that are bordering each other, not area directly held by Parsa. But again, for the purpose of its existence on this map for this mod, I think having it just be a single Parsa tag with a large income that other nations can kind of interact with as a tag is probably better for gameplay design. More realistically, this should be the different areas of Lydia and the area south of it. I don't remember what the name of it was, something with an M. But just for the design of this map, I'll go with that. Now, one thing I will reveal or say as a very far in the future stretch goal for post-release of this mod as an update I could do later on is to actually re-include the Mediterranean area and the coastline, and all of this stuff is going to be held by Parsa and Parsan or Persian clients and vassals. So technically speaking, there is records that before the Peloponnesian War and after the Peloponnesian War, the Greeks would invade places like Egypt, right? And so the Greeks were able to actually sail around the whole Mediterranean during this period. They weren't in the Aegean out of a lack of ability to leave it. And of course, also not on this map is the western stuff that was in the war, like Sicily. So during the actual war, basically this area over here is the eastern extent of where the war sort of took place. However, that doesn't mean that the war in an alt history scenario like this mod can only take place in the Aegean. It is completely possible that in an alt history Peloponnesian scenario, for example, say you're playing as Athene, you win the war, and then you decide to go to war with Parsa and sort of accomplish the ultimate goal of the Delian League. It'd be much more interesting for that scenario if Parsa isn't a relatively small, given its actual size, section of the coastline of Asia Minor, but it's actually the entire Mediterranean expanse of Parsa. Also, if like what you see on the screen right now basically was the map of the mod, the full scale of Parsa would be much easier to comprehend, and this is not including stuff that's not even on this map to include Parsa. So it would help really make it clear how much danger the Greek world is in from Parsa and give more context to the background. However, the main reason I'm not committing to have the larger Mediterranean version of a Hegemony map is the amount of work that I'm doing on localizing and designing tiles. Each individual tile involves, at the minimum, a couple minutes of research on the classical Greek name for that area. I often have to use Google Maps to even figure out what current cities I can find to then look up on their pages, their ancient history, because a lot of the time I don't know the name of the classical Greek city or village that would have been on that spot. I have to find it through researching the modern day city that's on that spot or modern day village that's on that spot. So that often involves at minimum a couple minutes of research, and that's just to find the name for localization. There's then researching, was this a major city during the Peloponnesian War? Because, for example, important cities like Rhamnois and Marathon, these are both cities, but whether one of them was a city or not during the Peloponnesian War or should be depicted in the mod as a city is its own question that has to do as well with gameplay balancing. For example, the reason why I've made Marathon a city and Rhamnois not a city is because Marathon has a port slot, which on the Bronze Age map, only some coastal tiles have port slots. Rhamnois probably should be a city to be realistic, but then it'd be also too close to the larger cities from the period of Oropos and Marathon. So basically, there's a lot of thought that goes into how I design each tile, and that's per tile, right? I'm having this conversation in my own head with every single tile on this map, right? That's why I'm designing all these areas sort of section by section. And then that's not even getting into the redesigns I'm doing for the province layouts, the region layouts, the borders of the nations. Now, fortunately, if I were to do sort of big Parsa as the plan for the mod, it's all going to be held by Parsa or by a mixture of Parsa directly and its client states, like its Egypt vassal, its Lydia vassal, so on and so forth. However, the amount of tiles involved over here is extreme. This is an enormous amount of work for localizing, designing the province and region layouts, an area that is multiple times the size of the area I've been sort of conceptualizing so far. Keep in mind, so far, I've just been working on the southern parts of Greece. There's still the northern parts. But even all this together, multiple times, is then all these different tiles over here. And sure, this amount of work would result in a better map mod for every scenario. To have a larger map with more territory involved is always good. So it's not like a balancing act of a good idea versus it not being a good idea. It is a good idea. The issue is, on top of the amount of work needed to localize and redesign the borders over here to the extent that it would be consistent with Greece, I also would have less resources to make use of, because there's a lot of scholarship, a lot of maps of classical Greece. Not so much about classical Persia. There's some of them out there, but there's not as many to work with, and my ability to accurately depict classical Persia at the scale of Bronze Age would be fairly limited. And I'm not super comfortable having shoddy work if I don't have the research to make it high quality. So all things considered, the plan for now is for Hegemony to include basically up to the border of this river here. This is going to be the cutoff over in the east, and basically this will be the cutoff in the south. This section here will be the map of Hegemony, with the stretch goal post-release in an update of potentially adding in the Mediterranean coastline of Parsa, especially to coincide with a playable version of Parsa. The plan at the minute is that Parsa possibly won't be playable, as their existence on this map is already so weird in, like, most of their territory is not on the map, and I'd have to give them some extreme income boosts to sort of represent their power correctly. Having Parsa be only AI controllable probably fixes the problem, because they're not really a fully realized nation on the map as they'd be depicted with the borders that they'll have. So that's basically my thoughts on Parsa. I know that this is kind of convoluted, but I think this is the best way to approach having Parsa be on the map, which is very, very important for the geopolitics of this mod, but also have them not be on the map in a way that completely balloons the progress of this mod and prevents me from finishing it in the next couple of years, basically, it feels like. Or maybe that's a bit of an overstatement, but it's going to add multiple months of work onto this mod for questionable return, given that the focus of the mod is very much on the Aegean area specifically. So that's what I have to say about Parsa. I'll talk a bit more about Parsa a bit later on when I talk about a different system that I envision a Parsan version for, which will only really be relevant, especially if Parsa is playable, but the AI parser could still do this stuff as well. So having said all that, let's now talk about some changes I've made to some systems in the mod beyond now the map changes that I've talked about. I'll then talk about the Achaea area, which you may have noticed I've also finished working on over here. So before talking about that, let's talk about some work I've done on Athenai, which has now received a fully designed heritage. I've also started working on designing the government systems. and a new system called alignment, which I'm very excited to talk about, as this fixes a big problem I was having, sort of conceptualizing how relationships with the leagues would work in the mod. So, first things first, let's talk about... actually, I think the best place to start is to talk about alignments, because I've designed the Athenian heritage in relationship with the alignment system. So, alignment is a completely new system for Hegemony, which is using the framework of the religion system from the base game. Now, I have quite a few paragraphs on the Discord talking about my thoughts on how the alignment system will work. Basically, my thinking here with why I'm using the religion system is the religion system, in the way that it works in the game, where populations, each pop has its own religion, like tag that it follows, that it has that religion. Characters have a religion, and then countries have a sort of state religion, which the sort of asymmetry between the country religion and then pop and character religion affects things like happiness and loyalty. This is the exact perfect system to transform into alignment. So in Hegemony, alignment is going to represent sort of the political leanings of populations, characters, and countries. And the alignments are going to be, at this stage, the plans are Delian, Peloponnesian, or unaligned. So unaligned basically means neutral, but it also means against the Delian and Peloponnesian interests, right? So for example, there could be events where if you're playing as a Delian nation, if you do something that is unpopular to your people, some of your Delian population may convert to become unaligned, to represent a loss of support for the Delian cause. So thinking of it as sort of a cause, right, the alignment. So your nation has an alignment that is going to have a starting alignment, right? Every nation has a different starting alignment. Athena obviously has the Delian alignment to start with. But the alignments, like your nation's religion, can be changed. And changing your alignment is going to be the gameplay way in which switching sides kind of occurs. Now, what I plan to do is, unlike in the base game, where changing religion is a decision that you can click at will, where it requires, certain amounts of population to already be of that religion in order for the state conversion to happen of the state religion, alignment is going to work in kind of the other way around. Alignment is a top-down thing, not a bottom-up thing, because the alignment is a decision the country makes, and then they're making that decision looking at the population to decide, is it feasible to make this decision, as opposed to it's a decision the population makes, which the country then switches to kind of follow along. Of course, in real history, some nations change their state religion without it being reflective of the population, but that's not super common. And anyways, the alignment system really is designed to be a political choice the country has to make, which will have an effect on the loyalty of characters and population. So alignments are, again, Delian, Peloponnesian, and unaligned. And what's really excellent about using the religion system as our starting point for this new system for Hegemony is the fact that populations and characters have their own individual alignments expands the complexity of the politics of this game in such a great way. Because now, decisions that you make that are leaning towards, your country's alignment, or perhaps even to switch sides to another alignment, result in internal challenges where if your entire country is super, super pro-Delian, say you're playing as, I don't know, a nation in Uboa like Oreos, right? I haven't changed their alignment yet, so just ignore that they say Aegean. But say you're playing as some nation somewhere, right, that is maybe not the hegemon, but is a super, super pro-Delian nation. Your entire population at the start is Delian aligned. All of your characters are Delian aligned. But you, the player, decide to, have a hard campaign and decide that you're going to become an unaligned nation. You're going to leave the Delian League. You can switch your country's alignment to unaligned. However, all of the infrastructure of your country, all the population, all the characters in your government are still pro-Delian. So they're all not going to be very happy about you switching the country to unaligned, right? And there may be events where the trigger for the event is the lack of religious unity or alignment unity, over some percentage, where you basically are told, switch back to the Delians to represent what your population wants, or we're going to have a civil war, right? And so switching around your alignment should be something that carries a lot of weight, and it should be something where there can be a whole system of subterfuge and espionage where, for example, as Athenae, you can have events or decisions or whatnot where you try to kind of ideologically convert, for example, say Argos, right, an unaligned nation at the start, and convert their population to become pro-Delian, so that they have internal pressure from their own population and their own characters to switch their country alignment to Delian. So that's an example of how the system opens up a massive sort of floodgate of interesting ways for the politics of this mod to kind of work as a gameplay system. I'm very excited to continue working on and conceptualizing these systems, but as you can see, I've already started to really think through all these different ways that using the religion system as a stand-in for politics, in this case alignment, it does a great job at accomplishing the goals of the mod and representing these politics. So, having explained how the system works more generally, let's talk about how the Delian alignment is going to work in a gameplay way. So, let me talk about the lore here first of all. So, led, some would say ruled, by Athenae, the Delian League is a tightly centralized alliance of coastal city-states across the Aegean and Ionian seas. Delian navies are unequaled in the Greek world, and under their steadfast protection, international trade has flourished. Many members have adopted Athenae's experimental new system, the democracy, empowering the people to rule themselves. However, the Delian League now faces an existential threat from the legendary armies of Lacedaemon and their Peloponnesian League. So, the way that I envision all the different alignments working is 5 strong bonuses for each of them, for being Delian, being Peloponnesian, and being unaligned. And the Delian bonuses are all contextualized by the text of the description here. So, for all Delian aligned nations, becoming Delian aligned on the state religion level, right, the state alignment level, gives you these bonuses. Morale of navies plus 10%. Obviously, Delian navies are superior to Peloponnesian navies, even putting aside whether the navies are led by Athenae directly or not. All Delian navies have a big morale boost over their counterparts in the ocean to help the Delian-aligned nations have greater naval control. Navy maintenance costs minus 25%. This is one of the strongest bonuses from this league, because the Delians really should have an incentive to focus on naval buildup, because in the war, it wasn't just that the Delians had better ships or better captains, they had more ships, they had naval supremacy for most of the war, and it was ultimately, arguably, Lacedaemon basically striking a deal with Persia, right, or I guess in this case Parsa, to get Persian naval support to then have the numbers to actually beat back the Delians, which led to Athenae losing the war in real history. National commerce income, 10%. This is a very strong bonus, and I want the Delian nations, which are all mostly maritime, city-states that have a big commerce economy, to focus in on their commerce, compared to, for example, the tax economy bonuses that the Peloponnesians will get to represent their focus more on slavery and helots in the case of Sparta and whatnot. Naval range, 25%. Delians have better abilities and control over the ocean, so they have better naval range. And party approval plus 0.10. This is on purpose a bonus that's only useful to democracies. Now, at the start of the game, I think all Delian members, or most Delian members in 431, will be democracies anyways. But, of course, you can change your government during this game, and that can have an effect on your relationship with your alignment and your league and whatnot. But monarchies are still allowed to join the Delian League. As part of the war, especially as the war progressed, both Athenae and Lacedaemon softened their requirements for their league members to have the correct government type that they preferred. And especially pragmatically, Athenae would sometimes have oligarchies join the league and not really push them to become democracies as they did for other members earlier on, just situationally. So this bonus is only helpful for democracies to represent how the Delian League is meant to be a league of democracies. But, if you're playing as a monarchy, party approval as a modifier doesn't do anything. So that's kind of how that works. And party approval plus 0.10 is a pretty strong bonus for democracies. This is basically around the value of a very, very strong, I don't remember the name of the office, but there's an office for democracies, or I guess democratic republics in the base game. I've renamed them to democracies. We'll talk about the democracy bonuses in a minute, but there's an office for democratic republics in the base game that gives party approval as its modifier. I think like a 10 charisma character in that office, or whatever the stat is, gives you about 0.10 party approval. So it's a pretty strong bonus that democracies will benefit from to have more stable democracies. So that's the situation with the Delian bonuses. Let's talk now about the democracy government form. A democratic city-state was ruled directly by its people, traditionally male citizens over 20, who met regularly in assemblies to vote on political issues and elect officials. Democracies were popular with citizens who enjoyed unrivaled political power under the system, but were vulnerable to instability. So there's a lot going on here in the text on the screen that I need to kind of work through step by step. First of all, I will relocalize the republic government type to just say democracy, because technically in this period, none of the nations were republics in the way that the Romans had later on. I guess the Romans had a republic by this point, actually. I think they did by this point. I don't remember offhand, actually. I think at this point they had a republic. But Rome's not on this map anyway, so don't worry about that. But whatever the case, what I'll probably do is have this version of democracy you're looking at right now be the default one, and give the Athenai tag its own specific Athenian democracy, because they had their own special dynamics going on too. Either way, for now, for sort of representation purposes, we've got the democracy government form to look at here. So rulers reign for 10 years. This is the historical account of the Athenian democratic system. Now, keep in mind, this is 10 years of actual years and not the years in the time scale. So essentially, in the time scale of this mod, 10 years is most of the campaign, or a huge part of the campaign, because it should be hour by hour, not day by day. And so essentially, democracies don't really have re-elections in this mod, essentially. I sort of don't know how to approach this, because with the lower time scale, if we have 10-year rulers, you're basically not going to have re-elections for most of the game. So I'll figure this out later. I may make some changes just for gameplay purposes, so democracies do have shifting leaders, but I don't know. Rulers have to be 30 years old to be elected and can be re-elected immediately. This is the Athenian system. And I'm giving the 4 idea slots. I've actually changed the entire system of idea slots, which I'll talk about more later in the video, to what are called priorities. But every nation will have access to all 4 kinds, and I'll talk about the way that system will work later. And then ignore the 100% civ level. That's just a sort of temporary thing while I redesign how civ levels work, so that doesn't mean anything. I don't have any matched up idea bonuses for democracies. Instead, they just have a default set of bonuses, because I don't want these bonuses tied to lining up the priority system correctly, because I'm using that system in a different way. But what democracies will get over oligarchies is 10% more PI per, I guess I was going to say month, but I guess it's going to be per day, because the month ticks will basically be days. 5% increased citizen happiness, and minus 0.05 stability trend all the time, because democracies are less stable than oligarchies in this period. So I'll talk about the priority systems later. These are all changes to the idea slots, and I've already designed the military priorities in their entirety, so I'll talk about that later. First, though, let's talk about Athenian heritage. So, the heritages, I should note, the descriptions are written subjectively from the point of view of the nation, so prepare for some pro-Athenian framing. In 431 BCE, Athena is at the height of her power. In this last half-century, she has worked tirelessly to lead the Greek world out of Persia's shadow and into a golden age, spreading the light of democracy and extending her protection to city-states far and wide. By the way, I had not yet localized Persia here to what I have it here, Pasta, so I will change that later, but anyways. Her legendary navies dominate the seas, and tribute from the Delian League, over which she has always been and must always be hegemon, allows her to continue to expand her fleets indefinitely. Her reasonable expectations of loyalty from her allies, however, has increasingly drawn the ire of other powerful Greek city-states, especially Lacedaemon. She also remains nervous of oligarchic coups, which the ambitious nobility of Attica would be all too happy to support. To preserve her democracy, her prestige, and her Delian League, Athena must adapt to a world plunging into total war or face utter destruction. Right, so this was written directly by Pericles, I think. But in terms of the modifiers, the heritages in this mod, given the smaller scale, every single tag will have its own custom heritage with 3 bonuses and 2 malices to really create quite a bit of specific kind of personality and gameplay modifiers for each tag. Now, the Athenai ones are pretty interesting. The bonuses are shipbuilding cost minus 25%. As noted in the description here, this reflects the role of the Delian League in funding Athenian naval buildup throughout this whole period, and this is going to pair with Athenai being in the Delian League, right? These bonuses all stack on top of each other. So the combat bonus from morale of navies 10% is a Delian sort of general bonus. Athenai, though, gets the shipbuilding bonus because Athenai, on top of enjoying the Delian combat bonus, also builds a lot of ships and has individually the strongest navy in the entire Delian League, right? And at the start of the game, Athenai's navy is going to be like in the hundreds. Like the way I'm going to approach the naval scale, I'm going to have realistic naval scale with like hundreds and hundreds of ships. So I'll have to redesign how naval maintenance cost works and all that stuff to make that all make sense in the game, but whatever the case. Athenai also gets tribute income plus 25% and loyalty of subject states plus 40%. Basically, the way that I envision this working is that the least independent Delian nations will be direct subjects of Athenai at the start. Nations like those in Euboea are not necessarily vassals or subjects, but they are on the way there. And Athenai will have its own system. Really, this will be something that the Hegemon can do, but I'm working on coding how that will work. But for now, Athenai will have its own system as the Hegemon, where it can basically sort of like in Hearts of Iron with your puppets. It can basically spend resources to reduce the autonomy of its members of the Delian League and turn them into subject states. And Athenai did collect a lot of tribute from the Delian League to fund everything, including funding the Parthenon. So the Parthenon will be, I think, a wonder in this mod that Athenai controls, and they can maybe have events where they continue improving it and building it using the Delian money. But Athenai does get a lot of its income from its tribute from the Delian League. I'll probably have a system where, in the Delian League specifically, being aligned with the Delian League at all means, because again, keeping in mind that alignment on the country level means membership. That's what alignment on the country level means. On the pop and character level, alignment means sort of loyalty or kind of political belief. So for example, you can have a character that is Delian aligned as a character, and that character supports the Delian League politically, and a population unit that is Delian aligned supports the Delian League politically, but a country that is Delian aligned is in the Delian League as a member of the League. That's what country alignment is going to mean. Hence why I'm going to be changing how countries change their alignment to represent joining or leaving a league or whatnot, right? So I can probably do some coding shenanigans to make alignment on the country level result in paying a tribute to Athenai or the current Hegemon, which was how the Delian League was set up. The Peloponnesian League did not work like that, though, so it needs to be Delian specific. But anyways, Athenai also has national noble happiness minus 10%. I'm still conceptualizing how populations will work because I don't want them to provide the same bonuses they do in the base game. Essentially, nobles in this mod will probably represent oligarchs or like oligarchic families. And as noted in the lore here, Athenai was nervous about being destroyed by an internal coup from the old families of the previous Athenian monarchy. Keep in mind, the Athenian democracy is only, I think it's about 100 years old. It might be a bit older than that, but it's really not that recent. And it's still quite vulnerable to the old families of the old monarchy reestablishing power. And Athenai knows that if its democracy collapses, the democracies in its allies, which are mostly there with the continued guarantee and support of Athenai, will also collapse to similar oligarchic coups. So Athenai has a kind of existential anxiety about its internal failure to maintain its democracy, causing all of the other democracies in its orbit to also collapse in a similar way. So the noble happiness situation in Athenai should be difficult to maintain. Athenai should be constantly nervous about oligarchic coups from its nobles. I'll work on systems for the noble happiness to result in sort of oligarchic coup anxiety in a gameplay way, but for now, that's what this modifier is. And again, all these modifiers I'm showing you are all subject to change. They're basically, at this point, stand-ins for the ideas I want these heritages and whatnot to give you in terms of modifiers, but I may tweak them and rebalance them as I continue working on the project. Lastly, Athenai has an improve opinion maximum minus 75%. This seems very extreme, and the goal with this is to represent Athenai's unpopularity outside the Delian League. At the stage when the war is beginning in 431, if you're not already in the Delian League, you're probably pretty anti-Athenai. There are some sort of examples that are not like this, like Argos, who is slightly pro-Delian, but that's more because they're anti-Lacedaemon than they are pro-Delian. Athenai has not really been doing a lot of... Athenai's actions over the years have not led to them having a popular standing in the Greek world. So basically what this modifier is meant to represent is that nations that aren't in the Delian League, Athenai is not going to have an easy time politically convincing them to join the League by improving opinion with them. Athenai is going to have to rely on more so like subterfuge and espionage to basically force nations into the Delian League by, having democratic revolutions there, and then these new democracies run to Athenai for protection. So Athenai is going to be set up by this modifier to approach diplomacy with non-Delians from a more hostile or kind of bludgeoning approach, or kind of a more, a legerdemain approach, where it's more about subterfuge and trickery and kind of forcible diplomacy, gunboat diplomacy, I guess trireme diplomacy in this period, in order to get people to join the League, more so than, diplomatically convincing them to join the League. Lacedaemon, who, is not necessarily the most infamous for its diplomatic finesse, is going to be more able to convince people to join their League because they have a very clear, easy enemy to sort of rally against, which is Athenai. So basically, I'm still working on how to exactly implement this modifier in a way that's balanced, but Athenai should basically be very unable to improve relations with other people. People that are in the Delian League will have an extreme opinion boost towards Athenai, so their own members should be pretty okay with them. But as the war progresses, to sort of simulate what Thucydides talks about, Delian members, and really all League members, should be open to rebelling and switching sides as the situation calls for. So, whatever the case, that is the Athenian heritage. Let's go ahead and hop into the Athenian tag here, actually, and I'll go ahead and show you the work that I've done over here in Achaia. So Achaia is the next region I worked on. And actually, before I talk about that, I have one more thing to talk about that I just noticed I should probably talk about first, which is my relocalization of the southern Greek area. So I've been talking with some folks that have some good knowledge about ancient Greek language and etymology, and I've made a few changes to the localization that I've been doing to be consistent with the ancient Greek spelling of many words. Basically, the letter C is not in the ancient Greek language, or should be represented by the letter K. The letter, or the sort of pronunciation of F should be replaced by the letters PH. So that is also a change that I've made. And the letters U and V are both not really in ancient Greek and should be represented by Y. So, having noted that, I've made a lot of localization changes. For example, Eleusis is now Elasis. That's another example. Brauron is Bryron. The region of Euboea is Iboa. And the region of Valia is now Yalea. And you can pronounce it the same way, and this is mostly just a visual change to be closer to the ancient Greek. But anyways, just wanted to sort of note that in case you notice a lot of Y's suddenly appearing all over the place. Anyways, so Achaia is this northern region along the coastline of this gulf, and this is a region mostly defined by being fairly neutral in 431. At this stage, there's a I guess let me talk about the nations that are involved here first before we get into the details. But basically, going from east to west, over here in this corner is the trio of nations, Philios, Sicyon, and Pellene. Now, Sicyon and Philios are not actually Achaean culture. Sicyon is more so kind of Corinthian culture, or kind of, Isthmus culture, and Philios has cultural ties to Argos. But Sicyon and Philios are both in the Peloponnesian League, both because of their situation. Sicyon is culturally pretty connected with Corinthos, and they're friendly with Corinthos, so Corinthos brought them into the league. Philios is very scared of Argos, who they've had conflict with before, so they've joined the Peloponnesian League out of an anxiety about Argos, who of course is unaligned. So these two are in the Achaia region, more so just out of convenience for shaping the region, but they're not really in the Achaean culture group, and they're not really connected with the Achaean culture that the other parts of the region are connected together with. Then we get to Pellene. Pellene is Achaean, and there's basically 12 Achaean city-states that would later in history form the Achaean League, but at this point, these are the city-states that I am depicting on the map here. Pellene is one of these 12, and it's the only of the 12 who is Peloponnesian aligned at the start of the war in 431. They have joined the Peloponnesian League mostly because they're the furthest away geographically from the de facto hegemon of the region, which is Dyme, who we'll talk about later, and because of their connections with Sicyon and their closeness to the Peloponnesian center. So Pellene is Peloponnesian aligned. They're going to have their own mission tree focused on bringing the rest of the region into the Peloponnesian fold, either militarily or diplomatically, and they have the support of Lacedaemon as a kind of entry point of Peloponnesian influence into Achaia. Achaia, remember, aside from this, the rest of this is all neutral. And this is very much a kind of borderland between the pro-Delian, territory around Naupactus and Amphisa, and then the Peloponnesian core down here. So, in fact, the sort of crossing point over here at Patrae is one of the stronger city-states that is neutral. So, talking about these city-states now, so putting aside Pellene, the other 11 Achaean city-states are Dyme, Phare, Tratea, Olenos, Patrae, Aigion, Repes, I think, Chaeronea as well. Chaeronea is in the region, it's inland though. Helike, Bura, and Aigera. So basically, all of the ones along the coast are a bit stronger. The weakest of these city-states is probably Chaeronea, who is fully inland and next to the pro-Peloponnesian Arcadian city-states. But basically, of these city-states, the strongest ones are definitely Patrae and Dyme. Dyme is the strongest of these city-states, although it's of a level of strength where it is similar in strength to, for example, I don't know, maybe like Epikaros or, I don't know, like Tegea. I think Tegea is probably good at the comparison point. So it's strong for its region, but it's not strong compared to, for example, Megara or like Elis or whatnot, right? There's sort of different levels of strength for comparison. And Dyme is stoutly non-aligned. They don't want to get involved in this war. They're not very interested in getting dragged into it, especially because their region does border the ocean so much, which, is the domain of the Delians, and because, across the water is this powerful Athenian naval base at Naupactus. So definitely they're concerned about their region getting drawn into the war. In the real history, Achaea does become a pretty important front line of the war for those exact reasons, and neutrality was pretty hard to maintain. So playing as Dyme, you're going to have your own mission tree where trying to maintain your neutrality and your unaligned alignment is going to be pretty difficult. You're going to have a lot of pressure from nearby Elis to join the Peloponnesian League. And essentially, Dyme, as the kind of de facto hegemon and cultural leader of the Achaeans, has a lot of influence over the whole region. So the other Achaean city-states will probably also stay unaligned if Dyme stays unaligned. So if you're playing as Atenae or Lacedaemon, you have a special interest in particular in pressuring Dyme to join your league, because the other city-states in Dyme's influence don't feel comfortable defying it and will follow it into whatever league it goes to, perhaps. So this is kind of a fun little thing where basically Atenae and Lacedaemon, or whoever the hegemons may end up being after some time has passed in the campaign, can pressure Dyme to join their league with the chance of other Achaean city-states basically flipping over as well to follow Dyme, whatever Dyme does. Now, Dyme can also lose its influence over its region if it starts to sort of lose in combat or if it has internal problems. The next strongest city-state in the region is Patrae, and they control this extremely, extremely important crossing between the two sides of the water. So Patrae has a lot of power, especially over Atenae, and Atenae is in a good position here to really want to try to pressure and influence and do subterfuge to make Patrae become Delian so that they can control the crossing on both sides, which would be excellent for Atenae's blocking in of Corinthos. And similarly, Corinthos has a strong motive to try to sway Patrae to join the Peloponnesian League for those same reasons in reverse. So that's the situation going on with Achaea, more or less. I haven't done all of the flag design and country coloring that I will do. Similar with Arcadia, I haven't done that yet either, so all that will come later. But that's basically that for the Achaea region. Now, I think I've covered the stuff I want to cover for this video. I've talked about the heritage, I've talked about the alignment stuff. Oh yeah, let's talk about priorities. I was going to talk about that at the end here. So priorities are a new system for hegemony, and they are taking the place of national ideas. Basically, and I can show you because I've already done some modding for this stuff here, countries may prioritize the efforts of their government on one area of whatever it is at a time. Priorities can be changed at will and with no cost. So this is my transformation of the idea system into something basically new for the mod. Priorities are, and I've only finished the military priorities, so don't look at the other stuff here, that's all placeholder, but the military priorities are for now done. Priorities are a new system that are going to represent the, and I need to kind of explain the system in the context of a couple different systems. So think of it like this. There are 4 different systems in Imperator Rome, in the vanilla Imperator Rome, that represent different kind of customs and requirements and kind of internal goings on of your country, and also diplomatic stuff. These are national ideas which have a small PI cost to change. Religion and deities and omens, which have a time cost to change. They cost time to adopt a new. The cost is time to adopt a new deity, and adopting an omen, there's a cooldown for that, but there's no other cost for it. And then you've got laws, which cost more PI and stability to change, so you can't change them as often. And then you have diplomatic stance, which costs a small amount of PI to change, and you can change often, like national ideas. So all 4 of these systems are being changed for Hegemony and reconsidered and sort of redesigned into a sort of giant combination of systems, with the goal being that there's different layers of sort of short-termedness. So the way that I'm envisioning this, and I talked about this in the Discord as well, is national ideas is now going to be called priorities. And essentially, there are 4 priority slots. And priorities, as you might imagine, is the short-term way you can basically sort of fiddle around and min-max your country's modifiers. Religion, as I noted earlier, has now been transformed into alignment. I haven't changed all of this stuff here yet, but you get the idea based on the UI that I've shown you here. Religion is now alignment, and so what that means is that with your alignment, different gods are actually going to be called different policies. And so these represent, policies that, your particular league is, going to want you to do. There's also some default policies that are not league specific, or maybe they're going to be unaligned or whatnot. But instead of religion, it's alignment. Instead of deities, it's policies. And instead of an omen, it's a focus on a policy. So you can focus on a policy, and you can focus on one policy at a time. That's different from the priority system that I'm going to describe in just a sec here, that's using the ideas sort of system as its origin point. Laws is the least change. Laws are just laws, and laws require quite an expensive amount of resources to change, and there's going to be more steps involved given the time scale here, so we'll talk about that some other time. I haven't worked on laws yet. Lastly, diplomatic stance, I'm changing to something pretty specific for this mod, which is stance on Persia, or I guess stance on Parsa. So I haven't changed this yet in the game, but I've been planning it out kind of on paper. And basically what that's going to do is the stance system, instead of 5 different just generic diplomatic stances, each of these stances is a stance on Parsa and your state's relationship with Parsa conceptually. It's going to go from, open war, you're hostile with Parsa, and the Parsan armies and navies can come and destroy you. And then you're like a trade embargo, where it's like, your commerce economy is greatly reduced because you're not able to trade with Asia, but you're in a state of hostility, but not open hostility with Parsa. The middle one will basically be kind of neutral, or kind of a no stance, where you just sort of don't have a position either way. And then you have, going further and further pro-Parsa, you have, appeasements to Parsa, where you are sending, appeasing diplomatic inquiries over to the Parsan courts. You're trying to have good relations with them. And then the final one is basically like supplication, like you're trying to become protected by Parsa. And this system makes a lot of sense when you're playing as, for example, an Ionian nation over here, the Ionian Greeks, who historically constantly sort of tried to break away from Persian influence or run back into Persian influence, depending on the situation. And the stance on Parsa system will allow for a level of complexity with diplomatic relations, because the more anti-Parsa you are, the more prestige your nation will have. For example, Atenai is when the game begins, in a state of basically like neutrality with Parsa. They were previously hostile with them, and there might be some events where certain factions within Atenai pressure you to go back to open war with Parsa. Remember, Atenai signed a peace. Actually, I don't know if you would know this, but I don't know why I said remember, but in case you don't know, Atenai signed a peace with Parsa in, I think, 449, something like that. I think it's around there. I think it was 449. And so Atenai does have a ceasefire with Parsa, but if they go back into open war, their kind of credibility and their sort of standing with the Greek world improves. So I'm thinking of something where the more hostile to Parsa your stance is, the more political influence you get, the more other Greeks will like you, your own league will like you more, stuff like that. But your commerce economy will get weaker. because a lot of the international trade in this period is with Persia. Because remember, Persia owns like the rest of the universe at this point. So your commerce economy will dramatically be hurt by becoming more hostile with Parsa, but your standing with the Greek world will improve. So I'm working on exactly how those modifiers will work. That's the basic way I conceive of it, though. And at the most hostile stance of open war with Parsa, the Parsa tag will be set to hostile to you. So they will have their armies come over and obliterate your land, and like their navies will blockade you. So if you're playing as an Ionian, going into open war with Parsa will be like a death sentence. So there could even be situations where you're playing as a member of the Delian League, the Atheni AI goes into open war with Parsa. They then send you events where they basically tell you, you have to switch your stance to open war with Parsa, or we're kicking you out of the league and going to war with you. And then you're like between a rock and a hard place. So there's all sorts of ways the system can result in really interesting scenarios, which is the whole point of a grand strategy game, is to put the player into interesting scenarios. So let's go back to the priority system, now that I've kind of explained the bigger picture of how all these different systems will work. So as I've said, I've only really worked on military priorities so far, and I will talk about those now. Basically, the way the priority system works more generally is I want to have it so that you can only have the priority of the correct kind. Otherwise, the balance here gets a bit weird, but I'll figure out how to do that later on. For now, the idea is that you have one of each kind of priority. And like I said, you don't have any bonuses for matching them, because matching them isn't supposed to be a mechanic anyways in Hegemony. They're supposed to just be set to their own kind. But either way, to give you a sense of the scale of things, let's take a look at the military priorities here. So, keeping in mind that you can only have one of these 9 priorities at a time, here are the different military priorities. The first one is deploy the Ektromoi, which gives you a hoplite offensive of plus 25%. Yes, I've been working on the units, and that is going to be the hoplite icon. I know, confusingly, this is the light infantry icon from the base game, but this icon actually looks a lot like a hoplite shield and spear from the period, so just imagine this is a heavy unit, because that's what the hoplite are. Our hoplite are vulnerable to skirmishers. We must order lightly armored Ektromoi outrunners to charge ahead of the phalanx and bring the fight to the enemy. So this gives you a 25% hoplite offensive boost. Another military priority is hold the phalanx, 25% hoplite defensive boost. The defensive capabilities of our hoplite are clear. We must order them to maintain the shield wall, no matter the enemy's provocations, and let them crash uselessly against it. And then the final one that has a direct combat effect is equip the Physoloi. So this improves Toxite discipline, Acontiste discipline, which is the slingers, using that icon that I got permission from the Terranomita guys to use, and Svendatane discipline, which is using the Bronze Age Reborn Javelineer icon, or I guess skirmisher icon, but basically representing archers, slingers, and javelineers, and those are the Greek names for them, respectively. Our Physoloi skirmishers may lack prestige, but they are critical to our armies. We must ensure each man is properly equipped as he needs with Svendanai, Akontai, or Toxa. So basically, if you can't tell already, having noted earlier that priorities can be switched around for free, there's no cooldown, no cost to switch them, as you can see here. Look at my resources not being changed around, right? It's completely free to change them. Basically, what I envision here is, as you're playing, given the slower pace of this mod compared to the base game, you should be constantly fiddling with your priorities all the time. Your priorities are things you switch into situationally and then switch out of situationally constantly. So this is a system that I very much plan to require quite a bit of learning to master, but the min-max potential is extreme. And as someone with a well-known affinity for min-maxing, this is a system that warms my cold little heart quite a bit. And I think that, envisioning playing the mod myself, constantly switching around policy or priorities situationally to strengthen myself right when I need it, is such a cool idea, and will reward a player who really takes the time to learn the system and learn how to use it to their full effect. Because army composition, for example, in this mod will be mostly hoplite, with a small minority of these support units like Toxite, Acontiste, and Svendanate. So there might be situations where a lot of your hoplite die in a battle, and your army has more of these kinds of units than normal, so you want to get this bonus here before battle to strengthen them. Or if you're trying to defend in a battle, hold the phalanx is the best option. You're trying to do an offensive attack, deploy the Ektromoi is the correct option, right? And so the kind of mental image I have, which is a very weird mental image to talk about with the grand strategy game, is like a pilot in a ship with all their like a bajillion like switches and controls, like like constantly like clicking around with their hand on the ceiling of their cockpit. That's what I envision as you're playing. I have to defend. I put on hoplite defense. Oh, I have to do an attack. I do the switch to switch over to offense. So the priorities are meant to be something you're constantly attending to and switching. And to help with this, given that they're currently from their old system tucked away in the nation overview menu and kind of awkward to reach, I'm going to try to mod the top bar to include basically sort of 4 things that represent your current priority for the 4 categories, and then you can click on it with a drop down to pick a new priority kind of on the fly to make that a bit easier. But I need to get better at GUI modding to figure out how to do that. But that's one idea that I've had. So getting back over to the military priorities, then we have the 3 naval ones. So we've got rely on periplois. Outflanking and encirclement are effective naval tactics. We must make the fullest use of our lighter and more mobile ships to control the flow of battle on the high seas. So in this mod, true to, as my research has shown, the real history of the Peloponnesian War, naval warfare basically involves only really triremes and ships that are lighter than triremes. So in this mod, there's basically going to be 2 kinds of ships, dry race, or rather diarace, and trirace, which are biremes and triremes in Greek, respectively. So there's going to be nothing heavier than triremes, because in all my research, I spent actually quite a bit of time researching this. There is no account of heavier ships than triremes being used regularly in the naval warfare of the Peloponnesian War at all by anybody involved. So basically, I'm not going to have any ships heavier than triremes be in this mod. I may make use of them in some form or another to recycle them for some other mechanic, but for now, the plan is that only diarace and trirace will be in the mod. And so rely on periplois, boost the offensive and movement speed bonuses of your biremes, your diarace. The next one is emphasize diekplois. Rowing our ships into and between the enemy formation exposes their sides to our rams. We must continue focusing on this tried and true strategy. So this is your main naval offensive bonus, boosting the offense and discipline of your trirace, which will be the majority of your ships. And then lastly, we've got the defensive-minded, expand the epi-batai. Garrisons of soldiers guarding the decks of our vessels transform them into floating fortresses. We must expand the epi-batai detachments aboard our ships. This improves trirace morale and defense, allowing for better defensive abilities in naval combat, so that can be quite handy if you're trying to defend. Next up, we've got these 3 sort of non-combat oriented but still military oriented priorities. The first is consult local guides. Army movement without roads, 25%. This is a pretty fun modifier that I've actually never seen in the base game, but it's in the code with its own icon and everything, so I figured may as well give it a use over here. Our men are not accustomed to marching off-road through the wilderness. We must pay curious locals to give them directions so they don't get lost. So basically, imagine you have a fight, so you're fighting, say you're fighting at Thermopylae, just for fun, and you have this fight, you're on the offensive, so you've switched over to deploy the Ektremoi. Fight's over, but now you've got to leave because the enemy up here has more forces coming in. But actually, this isn't a great example because there's roads over it. So let's say that you're actually off in the wilderness up here where I haven't built roads here yet, but say that there's no roads over here. Actually, let me guess where there's no roads. Where are there not roads at? Okay, let's say you're on the island of Eboa, right? You're on Eboa, and you've just fought a battle at Oreos. Now you've got to leave, right? And you want to actually go get picked up at Limni by your ships. There's no port here, there's no road here. So I guess that's not even a good example because it's army movement from a non-road tile. Okay, so you're trying to get picked up over here at Stropones, right? You're just leaving Calchis, and you're entering into Triada. Traveling off-road in this mod will be very, very slow, given the time scale. So you go to consult local guides so that your movement range between the non-road tiles is much, much faster. So, sorry I couldn't have a good example there to show you of non-road tiles. There's so many roads in this mod. But that's how consult local guides work. So you switch over to this situationally, and then you switch back over to something else. And I'll explain actually why this next one here might be your default one that you switch back to when you have nothing else to switch to. So this is Extol Veterans. Monthly war exhaustion minus 0.05. We rely on our veterans to return to war each new campaign season. We must make every effort to honor their service to the polis, so support for the war can continue. So basically, what I envision here is that Extol Veterans is kind of the default resting priority, that you switch back to when you're not focusing on some other thing, right? You situationally focus on offense or defense. You situationally focus on tri-race discipline or tri-race morale. But you can always benefit from monthly war exhaustion all the time, or the reduction of it. So you can basically always go back to extol veterans and then switch temporarily to a different priority and then come back to it later. Obviously, you can do whatever you like. This is just my sort of thought on how someone might approach it. Lastly, we've got justify misthropori. Though mercenaries are considered dishonorable by many, their strategic value is clear. We must work to justify why the realities of this war necessitate retaining such a force. So the way that I envision this working in the mod is that all mercenary army capacity bonuses will be removed, except for this one. So your power ranking, technologies, other things that can give you mercenary maximum bonuses will not be in the mod. The only way to get access to one mercenary army or mercenary navy is by using the justify misthophory priority. And that's because, based on my research, mercenaries were fairly uncommon in this period and were looked on with a lot of scorn and distrust. It was considered very dishonorable to supplement your forces with mercenaries, and basically to use mercenaries in this mod at all will require not only using this priority to get one mercenary slot, and there might be ways to get mercenary slots from other means that I haven't thought of yet, but this is normally the one way to do it in the mod. And then also you have to keep this active to keep your mercenary slot. If you switch off of this to something else, your one mercenary slot goes away. So to maintain a mercenary army on top of their cost, you have to also use a military priority as well to maintain your one slot. So that's kind of how I envision the serious cost of mercenaries in this time period for Greek states being represented in gameplay. So having said all that, I think I've covered everything in this extremely gigantic, oh my gosh, it's over an hour long, this super, super, super long dev diary. But as you can tell, this entire time I've been talking from beginning to end non-stop about everything. So there's been a lot of updates and more work is oncoming here with the project as well. I'll wait and see what the TI guys say about me using their assets for the custom flags. If they give me the green light, I'll go ahead and make another dev diary showing off all the various flag designs I've created with the different nations here. But either way, I'll continue updating the Discord with new updates. But for now, that's going to be it for this dev diary for the Hegemony mod project. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.